Today, we are diving deep into the physical reality of the digital world. We spend all day in the cloud streaming, scrolling, generating AI models. But that cloud isn't ethereal, is it?
Not at all. It lives somewhere very real. It lives in massive, hungry buildings called data centers.
Exactly, huge buildings. And those buildings are currently the centerpiece of one of the largest, most ambitious economic policy bets Brazil is making right now.
A huge bet. The push to establish itself as a global data processing superpower. It's a fascinating strategy.
It really is. Our deep dive focuses intensely on Brazil's, well, aggressive strategy to become a global data center hub.
And specifically, we're looking at that planned $50 billion investment signaled by ByteDance, TikTok's parent company.
Yeah, the Chinese social media giant. And they're targeting the northeastern state of Ceará specifically.
Which brings us right to the core tension here, doesn't it?
It does. Our mission today is really to unpack this complex story. You've got this national economic ambition on one side.
The dream of attracting, what, our $2 trillion in 10 years? Establishing digital sovereignty? Big goals?
Huge goals. But colliding, almost violently, with local environmental realities.
Especially water scarcity, a huge issue there.
And the rights of indigenous peoples. It's a real clash.
Absolutely.
So our sources today are pretty wide-ranging. We're looking at the actual text of new federal tax regimes like Red Data.
The big incentive package.
We've got regulatory mandates from Anatel, the telecom regulator.
Critical infrastructure classification stuff.
Right. Then there's high-level political reporting on those meetings between President Lula and TikTok executives in New York.
Yeah, the deal-making part.
And, crucially, some intense investigative reports detailing the local environmental and social conflicts happening right now in Ceará.
Those really bring the ground-level impact home.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the major incentives driving this digital gold rush. Why is Brazil pushing so hard right now?
Well, Brazil's motivation is both immediate and strategic. Economically, you've got this pretty substantial deficit in data processing services.
How big are we talking?
About US $7.1 billion annually. That's money flowing out of the country because businesses, government, everyone needs to store and process their data, and often they have to do it abroad.
Right, so it's an economic drain. But you mentioned strategic reasons, too. It's more than just the money, isn't it?
No, absolutely. Beyond the simple dollars and cents, this is framed as a national security concern, a sovereignty issue.
How so?
Well, the reliance on foreign infrastructure is profound. Some studies suggest up to 60% of Brazil's digital loads are currently stored outside the country.
60%? Wow.
Yeah. So think about it. If your critical government data, your sensitive industry data, your financial systems, if the processing for that happens overseas,
You lose control.
you lose control. Exactly. You potentially compromise national sovereignty over that data. And there's a performance issue, too.
Latency, right?
Yeah.
The speed it takes for data to travel.
Precisely. Significant latency issues when data has to cross oceans, and that's just unacceptable for modern real-time applications, especially things like AI development, which Brazil wants to boost.
Okay, so deficit, sovereignty, performance, big drivers. And the government's main tool to fix this is REDATA.
That's the one, the Regime Especial de Tributação para Serviços de Data Center, the special tax regime for data center services.
Catchy name.
Yeah. It was formalized via Provisional Measure 1.318 back in September 2025. And it really is, arguably, the largest, most comprehensive incentive package the sector has ever seen in Brazil, a real game changer.
So what's the core benefit? What makes it so attractive to, say, a huge company like ByteDance?
The centerpiece is a stunning financial advantage related to imports. We are talking about the suspension, which then converts to a zero rate once everything's set up and running of major federal taxes.
On what?
On the acquisition or importation of ICT equipment needed for the data center infrastructure. Servers, routers, cooling systems, power gear, all the expensive stuff.
Which taxes are we talking about? PS-GOFINs.
Yep, PS-GOFINs. Those are federal consumption and Social Security contribution taxes. Also IPI, the industrial production tax. And crucially, the imposto de importação, the import tariff.
But only if there isn't a similar product made in Brazil.
Exactly, for non-similar national goods. So if you can't buy the equivalent tech locally, you get a massive break importing it.
So for you, the listener, just imagine setting up one of these massive high-tech facilities. The hardware, the servers, the cooling, the networking gear, that's often the biggest chunk of the cost.
A huge chunk. And this REDATA regime basically slashes that initial capital expenditure, making Brazil suddenly look very, very attractive financially.
Okay, That's a powerful magnet, a huge tax break. But the sources show these benefits aren't just a free lunch, right? There are strings
Oh,
attached.
yeah, definitely. REDATA comes with some exceptionally rigorous mandatory conditions, counterparts, they call them. They're designed to make sure this foreign investment actually benefits the national economy and pushes sustainability goals.
Smart. So what are these conditions?
Well, first, there's a domestic market guarantee. Any company getting these tax breaks has to allocate a minimum of 10% of their total capacity processing, storage, data treatment to the national market.
Okay, so Brazilian companies are guaranteed some access to this new local infrastructure.
Exactly. Prevents it from just being an export platform. Second, there's a big R&D commitment.
Ah, this is key. So it's not just about becoming a giant server farm for the world.
Precisely. They mandate a significant research and development investment. Companies have to invest 2% of the total value of the incentivized goods, the hardware they got the tax break on, back into R&D projects within Brazil.
2% of potentially billions in hardware value.
Mm-hmm.
That's serious money for R&D.
It is. And it has to be done in partnership with recognized local institutions like Institutes of Science and Technology, ICTs, or specific government development funds.
So you're talking about funding local research into things like advanced networking, maybe AI algorithms, energy efficiency for tropical climates.
All of the above. Things relevant to Brazil's context. It's a crucial mechanism to ensure knowledge transfer, stimulate the local tech ecosystem, and not just host foreign tech.
Makes sense. Knowledge transfer is vital. But you mentioned sustainability too. Given the absolutely massive footprint of these facilities, what are the rules there?
They are non-negotiable and quite demanding. To qualify for REDATA, companies first have to demonstrate the use of 100% clean or renewable energy for their operations.
100%. That aligns Brazil with global climate goals, obviously. Essential.
Essential. But maybe the truly strict measure, the one that's causing a lot of technical discussion, is the water efficiency requirement.
Right. Cooling these places takes incredible amounts of water, traditionally.
It does. So REDATA mandates a very stringent water usage effectiveness index, or WUE. It has to be 0.05 liters per kilowatt hour or less.
Okay, 0.05 L kilowatt hour. Can you put that number into context for us? Is that low compared to older data centers?
It's extremely low. It basically forces companies away from traditional water-guzzling cooling towers, especially in warmer climates. It mandates the use of highly advanced cooling technologies.
Like what? Closed-circuit liquid cooling?
Yeah, typically closed-circuit liquid cooling, which reuses the same fluid or maybe highly efficient specific types of evaporative cooling, but only where the climate is just right. It's a very clear policy signal. The government won't subsidize outdated, water-intensive designs.
And this requirement essentially steers investors towards certain regions, doesn't it? Regions that can actually meet both the 100% renewable energy and this tough water benchmark.
Exactly. It narrows the field.
Yeah.
Which leads us to another feature of the policy.
The regional incentives, trying to push development beyond the São Paulo-Rio axis.
Precisely. The government deliberately built in a regional sweetener. If a data center is established in the north, northeast, or central west regions, areas historically lagging in industrial development, there's a bonus.
What kind of bonus?
Both the 2% R&D investment requirement and that 10% national capacity reservation requirement are reduced by 20%.
Ah, so it makes it slightly cheaper and easier to comply if you build in, say, the Northeast.
It's a direct, measurable financial signal. It clearly encourages global players like ByteDance to look specifically at the Northeast, where they can find that cheap, abundant, renewable energy, wind and solar that they need for the 100% clean energy rule.
So REDATA provides the big financial carrot. But data centers don't exist in isolation. They plug into the national telecom network. That brings in the regulator, Anatel, right?
Absolutely. That's Resolution 780/2025, which was published just before these major investment announcements started really firming up, August 2025, I believe.
And this resolution does something quite significant. It changes how data centers are viewed legally.
It does. It formally classifies data centers that are connected to public telecom networks as critical infrastructure.
Critical infrastructure. Okay, that sounds serious. That puts them on par with things like power plants, major ports, maybe airports.
Exactly that level. It elevates their regulatory status dramatically. It means these facilities are no longer just subject to standard commercial building codes or local planning rules.
So what does it mean in practice? More oversight.
Much more. They are now subject to mandatory conformity assessments and, crucially, homologation. That's a specific federal certification process by Anatel before they can even start operating.
And what is Anatel actually checking for during this certification? What are the key requirements under this new critical status?
The focus is heavily on resilience and security. Anatel demands proof of operational resilience. Can the facility guarantee continuous operation even during grid failures, natural disasters, or, say, major equipment faults?
Uptime guarantees, basically.
Exactly. But also robust physical security protecting the building itself and cybersecurity measures. Think about the sheer volume and sensitivity of data potentially stored inside. Protecting that is paramount.
So this regulatory layer from Anatel, it complements the financial incentives from ReData. It signals to international players, especially those handling sensitive corporate or maybe even government data, that Brazil is serious about stability and security.
Precisely. It builds confidence. You have the financial lure and you have the regulatory assurance of stability and security. It's a two-pronged strategy.
And this robust legislative and regulatory foundation seems to be exactly what set the stage for the massive deal we're tracking. The strategic move by ByteDance, Chinese tech giant behind TikTok, into Brazil.
Yeah, this is where you see the intense political coordination that's required to land an investment of this sheer scale. This wasn't just a standard business announcement. This was high-level politics.
Tell us about that. The sources mentioned meetings in New York.
That's right. The high-level political engagement was confirmed in September 2025 during the UN General Assembly Week in New York. President Lula met specifically with TikTok's CEO, Shozi Chu.
And Lula wasn't alone.
No, he was accompanied by Cearás Governor Elmano de Freitas and Minister Camilo Santana, who's a key figure in federal economic development and also from Ceará, importantly.
And the meeting was requested by TikTok.
That seems significant.
It is. The fact that TikTok initiated the meeting underscores the strategic importance they place on this move into Brazil and specifically into CR. They wanted direct engagement at the highest level.
And this meeting essentially firmed up that huge investment figure we mentioned.
It seems so. It solidified the number that had been floated earlier, particularly by the Minister of Mines and Energy during Lula's state visit to China back in May 2025.
Which was?
Up to $50 billion. That's the potential scale of ByteDance's investment in creating data center infrastructure focused on the Northeast.
Our $50 billion. It's just an astronomical figure. It really underscores the importance of this Brazil-China digital nexus right now, doesn't it? Absolutely. It's a cornerstone investment, potentially. But the key strategic choice here, the linchpin, is the location. CR. Why CR? What makes the PSEM Industrial and Port Complex, the SIP, the perfect landing spot for this kind of investment, aligning so neatly with those new federal rules? CR has several unique advantages that make it almost tailor-made for ReData. First, and maybe foremost in the digital world, connectivity.
Connectivity is king. Right?
Always. Fortaleza, the state capital near PSEM, is a crucial international data hub. It's the landing point for at least 17, maybe more now, international submarine fiber optic cables.
17 cables. Wow. Connecting Brazil to where?
Directly linking Brazil to Africa, to Europe, and to North America. So if you're running AI models or high-frequency trading or global content delivery, minimizing latency, that signal delay is everything. CR offers that direct high-speed connection point to key global markets.
So it's not just a random spot on the coast. It's literally the nerve center of South Atlantic data flow.
You could definitely argue that. Second advantage, and this links directly back to ReData, clean energy.
The Northeast big advantage.
It really is. The entire Northeast region is a national, even global reference point for renewable energy generation. It boasts vast wind power, eolic, as they call it, and solar power resources. Very competitive prices, too.
Which instantly satisfies that strict 100% clean energy requirement in ReData.
Instantly. It gives Ceará an immense competitive edge over regions in Brazil or even globally that are still heavily reliant on fossil fuels or maybe hydrogrids facing climate variability.
And it wasn't just Ceará's natural assets. The federal government seems to have actively, maybe even deliberately, tailored the regulatory environment to help steer this kind of investment specifically towards PSEM.
It looks very much like coordinated policymaking. They made sure the landing strip was smooth, so to speak. President Lula signed a specific provisional measure, this was back in July 2025, even before ReData was finalized, that mandates 100% renewable energy use specifically within export processing zones, ZPEs.
And the ByteDance project is planned for the PSEM ZPE.
Precisely within the PSEM ZPE boundaries. So you see the sequence. First, the ZPE clean energy mandate comes in July. Then ReData, with its 100% clean rule and regional incentives, arrives in September. Then the high-level meeting confirms the CERA investment.
It shows really strong federal and state alignment. The federal government crafts policies like REDATA and the ZPE law that perfectly leverage Sarai's strategic assets, connectivity, renewables.
While the state government, presumably, provides the local fiscal incentives, the infrastructure support within the port complex and, crucially, handles the environmental licensing piece, which we'll get to.
It seems like a brilliant strategy on paper. Attract foreign investment, create jobs, boost digital sovereignty, promote renewables. Yeah. What could go wrong?
Well,
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because when you move past the high-level policy documents and the political meetings, and you start digging into the environmental reports in the local context, you realize the absolutely massive scale of the physical demand this project creates.
and the conflict begins immediately.
Tell us about the scale shock. What do the environmental reports actually say about this TikTok DC?
The sources point to the Internal Environment Assessment Report. It's called a RAS, Relatorio Ambiental Simplificado, a simplified report for this planned data center. It projects an average power consumption of 210 megawatts.
210 megawatts
Yeah.
average.
Average, continuously. That translates, according to the report, to 5,040 megawatt hours consumed every single day.
Okay, let's just pause on that number. 5,040 milliliters per day. How can we help our listeners grasp that scale? The sources give a comparison, right?
They do, and it's staggering.
Yeah.
This single data center's projected daily consumption is equivalent to the residential energy use of approximately 2.2 million Brazilians.
2.2 million people.
Yes. That's more energy than is consumed daily by the residents of over 99.9% of all municipalities in Brazil. Think about that. One building using more power than almost every town or city's residential sector.
That really puts it in perspective. And regionally, how does it compare to, say, state-level consumption?
If you look at the estimated annual consumption, that's around 1.84 terawatt hours. The reports indicate that's greater than the total electrical consumption, everything combined, of 3 entire Brazilian states: Acre, Amapá, and Roraima.
So more power than 3 states combined for one data center project.
The sheer energy magnitude required by modern high-performance computing, especially for AI training and inference, concentrated in a single industrial complex. It completely warps the local and even regional energy landscape.
Now, you mentioned the Northeast has all this renewable energy, often even surplus generation. So plugging this in shouldn't be a problem, right? Just connect it to all those wind farms.
If only it were that simple. There were immediate friction points. The problem isn't usually generation capacity in the Northeast, it's transmission capacity, getting the power from where it's made to where it's needed.
Okay, what happened?
The National Electric System Operator, ONS, initially denied the project's request for access to the basic transmission network.
Denied it. Why?
Their technical assessment, according to reports, cited systemic inviability. Basically, they warned of high risks of significant overloads on the existing regional grid infrastructure if you tried to connect such a massive concentrated load.
So even with all the wind and solar power available nearby, the existing power lines, the substations, they just weren't built to handle a sudden, massive new demand point of 210 mil this year. The digital highway wasn't wide enough yet.
That's a good analogy. That's the bottleneck. The political will is clearly there. The renewable energy is being generated, but the physical infrastructure needed to move that power reliably and efficiently to a single hyper-concentrated point like the PSM complex. It was lacking, at least initially. It created a systemic risk that the grid operator, ONS, had a duty to flag. Presumably, major grid upgrades would be needed.
Okay, so energy transmission is a hurdle, but then there's the other critical resource issue, maybe even more sensitive in the Northeast: water.
Water, yes. Data centers, especially large ones, need immense amounts of water for cooling their equipment. And citing this project in Ceará, a state historically plagued by severe droughts. It seems inherently contradictory on the surface.
How much water are we talking about for this specific project?
The estimates cited in the reports mention a requirement of around 30,000 liters of water per day, just for the industrial processes, mainly cooling.
30,000 liters a day, in a region defined by water scarcity. That's bound to be controversial locally.
Hugely controversial. It immediately becomes a flashpoint.
So how is the state government trying to manage this? How are they addressing this very obvious local concern? Are they just hoping technology will solve it?
Well, the official line from the state government, specifically from Governor Elmano de Freitas, has been quite direct. He publicly guaranteed that the data center would not use potable water. Instead, it would be supplied entirely with reused water.
Reused water? From where?
The plan relies on a new sewage treatment plant being built within the PSM complex. Apparently, this plant is a private sector project designed specifically to treat industrial and possibly municipal wastewater to a standard suitable for reuse in industrial processes like cooling towers.
Okay, so they're promising a non-traditional water source. It sounds like a neat technical fix to what could be a major political headache. But is that solution technically sound? Is this reused water facility operational? Is the supply guaranteed?
Well, it's certainly an ambitious claim, and it hinges on that new treatment plant delivering as promised. The company involved in the DC project development, Casa dos Ventos, who were acting on behalf of ByteDance in the initial stages, they strongly defend the project's water credentials.
How? What's their argument?
They emphasize the technology. They argue that the data center will use specialized, state-of-the-art, closed-circuit liquid cooling.
The kind mandated by REDATA's strict WUE index.
Exactly. They argue this technology drastically mitigates water demand compared to older methods. They cite studies, including some by global tech leaders like Microsoft, suggesting these advanced systems can reduce water consumption by anywhere from 31% to maybe 52% compared to traditional air cooling or open-loop water cooling.
So they're essentially saying, yes, data centers use water, but we're using the absolute best, most efficient technology available, forced by federal law, so the impact will be much lower than you think.
That's the core of their technical defense. They're banking on the fact that REDATA's strict WUE index effectively forces them into using this highly efficient water-saving technology anyway.
But even with efficient tech, 30,000 liters a day, even if it's reused, is still a significant amount in a place like CR. And this quickly moves the conversation from high-tech cooling systems
To the very real, very human problem of water scarcity on the ground for local people. This isn't some theoretical environmental challenge for the future. It's an active source of deep socioeconomic conflict right now.
Just how bad is the water situation in that specific area around Caucaia where the DC is planned?
It's historically precarious. The sources highlight that the municipality of Caucaia has been officially designated as being in a state of emergency due to drought or severe water scarcity in 16 of the last 21 years. That's from 2003 to 2024.
16 out of 21 years. So it's a region perpetually living on the brink of water crisis.
Constantly. And the surrounding local communities, especially the rural ones, feel the inequity of resource allocation very, very acutely.
Inequity how? What are they experiencing?
Well, you look at small rural communities like Feijão, which is reportedly just 25 kilometers or so away from the glittering high-tech PASEM complex. Many residents there still rely heavily on really basic systems.
Like rainwater cisterns.
Cisterns, yes, and deliveries by Watertrix, the Caropipa. Reports mention families often receiving just one 16,000-liter truckload of water per month to cover all their household needs, drinking, cooking, washing, everything.
One truck a month. While just down the road, a massive industrial complex is being guaranteed potentially millions of liters, even if it's reused.
And that's exactly the grievance you hear from residents. They complain openly that the state government seems to prioritize guaranteeing water supply, often with discounted tariffs, too, for the big industries in the SIP complex, while they themselves lack basic, reliable, piped water infrastructure. They feel left behind, forgotten.
That sounds like a textbook definition of environmental injustice, doesn't it? When the state apparatus appears to prioritize facilitating foreign, high-tech industrial access to a scarce, vital resource over ensuring the fundamental needs of its own, often vulnerable citizens.
It certainly fits the pattern often described by that term. And compounding this whole issue, adding another layer of environmental sensitivity, is the physical location. The data center is planned just 2 kilometers away from the Lagomar do Coipe.
What's significant about the Lagomar do Coipe?
It's not just any local pond. It's reportedly the largest natural water mirror think lake or large lagoon in the entire state of Ceará. And crucially, it's also a designated environmental protection area, an APA, so it's ecologically sensitive land right next door.
This geographical proximity, the competition over scarce water, the sense of injustice, it all leads directly into the most serious local challenge facing this project, the rights of the Anacé indigenous people.
Yes. The Plain data center site sits on land that the Anacé assert is their ancestral territory. Their traditional lands span parts of both municipalities involved, Caucaia and São Gonçalo do Amarante, where the PASEM complex is located.
And what's their primary objection? What right do they claim has been violated?
For the Anacé leadership, this project represents a profound violation of their internationally recognized rights. They state unequivocally that their fundamental right to free, prior, and informed consent, often abbreviated as FPIC, was completely ignored during the project's development and initial licensing phases.
FPIC. That's enshrined in international law.
Yes, specifically in the International Labor Organization's Convention 169 concerning indigenous and tribal peoples. Brazil is a signatory to ILO 169. It's ratified it, meaning it's legally binding within Brazil.
So the Anacé argue the government and the company failed to consult them properly.
They argue the consultation never happened according to the required protocols through their own traditional procedures and representative institutions before decisions were made, with full information provided in a culturally appropriate way. They feel they were simply bypassed.
Now the project developer, Casa dos Ventos, they have a counter-argument based on distance, right? They claim the site isn't actually on designated indigenous land.
That's the core of the dispute. The developer claims the chosen site is over 20 kilometers away from any officially demarcated and titled indigenous land belonging to the Anacé.
Okay, over 20 kilometers from titled land, but the Anacé contest this.
Fiercely. They state the actual distance is much closer, maybe only 3 kilometers. But more importantly, their legal argument goes beyond just the formally titled parcels.
How so? What's their basis?
They are citing Article 231 of the Brazilian Federal Constitution. This article is critical because it guarantees indigenous rights, not just to the lands formally demarcated and registered, but to the lands they have traditionally occupied.
Traditionally occupied. What does that mean legally?
It refers to lands indispensable for their productive activities, essential for the preservation of environmental resources necessary for their well-being, and necessary for their physical and cultural reproduction according to their uses, customs, and traditions. It's a much broader concept than just titled property.
So the developer seems to be using a narrower, more bureaucratic definition focused on titled land, while the Anacé community is invoking a broader, constitutional and historical definition based on traditional territory and usage rights.
That's precisely the conflict. The Anacé argument, rooted in the Constitution, protects their rights to lands traditionally used for hunting, fishing, gathering medicinal plants, performing rituals, even if the complex, often slow, formal demarcation process for those specific areas hasn't been fully completed or recognized by the state yet.
And they argue the data center project, even if not directly on titled land, impacts this traditional territory.
Yes. Through its massive resource, demands energy and water, which could affect the local environment they depend on, and through the potential risks of contamination or disruption associated with such a large industrial facility operating nearby, it impacts the integrity of their traditional way of life.
Given the stakes and the alleged violation of constitutional rights, this hasn't just stayed at the level of local protests, has it? They've taken formal action.
They have. In August 2025, the Anacé leadership filed formal complaints denuncias with both the Federal Public Prosecutor's Office, MPF, and the State Public Prosecutor's Office of CR, MPCE.
And what are they demanding?
They are demanding the immediate suspension of the environmental permit that was granted for the data center project. They're using every available legal and constitutional channel to halt the project, framing it as the state sacrificing their fundamental rights for the sake of attracting foreign industrial investment.
This entire intense conflict, the scale, the water issues, the indigenous rights violations, it really begs the question. How did a project of this enormous scale, with all these known environmental and social liabilities, manage to get even preliminary approval seemingly so quickly?
Which brings us to the regulatory process itself and the shortcuts that critics say were taken at the state level.
What happened with the environmental licensing in CR?
This really highlights what appears to be a significant governance failure, stemming partly from a lack of clear, specific national standards for licensing these new mega data centers. CR's State Environmental Agency, SEMAS, employed a classification maneuver that critics argue essentially streamlined the process at the expense of genuine environmental and social oversight.
A classification maneuver. What was the critical loophole they used?
SEMAS has classified the colossal ByteDance TikTok data center project, remember, 210 millidouble power draw, massive water use potential as simple civil construction with low environmental impact.
Low environmental impact. That seems staggering. How can a facility consuming the energy equivalent of 2.2 million people and drawing thousands of liters of water daily be classified alongside minor construction?
It's precisely that classification that allowed for the shortcut. By deeming it low impact, the project was subject to much simpler, faster licensing rules. It meant the data center fell under the same regulatory category as structures like, get this, cartódromos go-kart tracks or Parque de Vaquejada, which are traditional Brazilian rodeo parks.
Go-kart tracks and rodeo parks, seriously.
That's what the sources report based on the classification used. And the consequence of that classification was huge. It meant the project only required a simplified environmental report, the RAS, Relatorio Ambiental Simplificado, instead of a full, detailed environmental impact study and report, the EIRIMA, Estudo de Impacto Ambiental Relatorio de Impacto Ambiental.
And the EIRIMA is the standard for major projects, right? What's the difference? What does doing only the simplified RAS actually miss?
The EIRIMA is far more comprehensive. It requires a much deeper analysis of potential impacts, consideration of alternatives, public hearings, and crucially, an assessment of cumulative impacts.
Cumulative impacts. Meaning
It would have required SEMIS to assess the combined environmental burden of this new data center, plus all the other existing, often highly water and energy-intensive industries already operating nearby in the PSEM Industrial and Port Complex, SIP. Things like the steel mill, the thermoelectric plants, other chemical industries.
So the total load on the local environment, especially water and air quality.
Exactly. The RAS, being simplified, allowed the state agency to essentially treat the data center project in isolation, minimizing its apparent impact on paper by ignoring the context of the already heavily industrialized zone it sits within.
Unsurprisingly, environmental specialists and legal experts heavily criticized this approach.
They did. They described it as an unjust acceleration of the process, driven purely by the desire to accommodate the investment timeline and secure the project for CRA. They argue it created a convenient loophole.
A loophole caused by what?
Caused primarily by the lack of specific national regulations for mega data centers from CONAMA, the National Environmental Council. CONAMA sets the rules for what triggers an EIRIMA. Without clear federal guidance for this new type of mega project, it created a regulatory vacuum.
And that vacuum allows states more discretion.
Precisely. It incentivizes what critics call a potential race to the bottom, where states might compete for investment by offering faster, less stringent environmental reviews. It gives states like CRA the autonomy to facilitate licensing for projects deemed strategic by the government, potentially accelerating approval regardless of the full range of localized costs and risks.
And the political priority seems clear when you look at who wasn't at the table when the national data center policy was being shaped.
That's another telling detail from the sources. The Ministry of the Environment, MMA, was reportedly notably absent from the key interministerial working groups and high-level discussions that formulated the National Data Center Strategy REDATA, the Anatel rules, the ZPE coordination.
So the policy was driven primarily by ministries focused on
Economic Development, Finance, Energy, Communications, the President's Chief of Staff's Office, Casa Civil, the Economic and Strategic Portfolios. The relative lack of high-level, upfront involvement from the Environment Ministry suggests, to critics at least, a clear prioritization of attracting the investment and boosting the digital economy over ensuring comprehensive, independent environmental oversight from the very beginning of the policy design.
this entire story then. It really paints a picture. From the halls of power in Brasilia, where these sophisticated tax laws and regulations like REDATA are written,
to the meeting rooms in New York where the $50 billion potential deal was discussed between Lula and TikTok's CEO.
and finally all the way down to the dusty, water-stressed lands of Caucaia in Ceará, where indigenous communities are fighting for their constitutional rights and farmers worry about their wells.
It serves as a perfect, if somewhat painful, synthesis of Brazil's current development dilemma, doesn't it?
It really does. It perfectly illustrates the central paradox we identified at the start. Brazil has strategically and cleverly in many ways positioned itself on the global stage as a potential leader in digital sovereignty and clean energy development. See it in the REDATA incentives, the tough sustainability rules, the Anatel security requirements.
A very forward-looking national policy framework on paper.
Right. Yet the very first major test case, this flagship ByteDance project heralded under this new era, immediately runs into severe, deeply rooted conflicts. Conflicts over water rights, over fundamental indigenous consultation protocols, and all happening in a region already identified as highly vulnerable to climate change impacts like drought.
It throws the potential gap between national policy ambition and local implementation reality into very sharp relief.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to make sense of this massive geopolitical and technological shift? I think the sheer scale of the energy and water consumption we're talking about, required by modern AI infrastructure especially, forces us to look beyond that comforting label of clean energy.
Just because the energy source is renewable doesn't mean the project has no environmental or social footprint.
Exactly. We have to start asking much tougher questions about the real physical costs, the land use, the water use, the grid impacts, and the human costs hidden within this rapid digital transformation. Who benefits and who potentially pays the price locally?
And the conflicts unfolding in Sierra raise that crucial, maybe uncomfortable question for Brazil's whole development strategy moving forward. Can digital advancement truly be sustainable and genuinely inclusive if the regulatory system allows these mega data centers, these energy and water behemoths, to be classified as low-impact construction, comparable to a go-kart track or a rodeo park?
Hmm.
Can it be inclusive if it appears to bypass the fundamental constitutional and internationally recognized rights of the traditional communities who have lived on and depended on that land for generations? It really forces us and policymakers to scrutinize whether the undeniable promise of technological advancement and economic growth justifies the very real, localized costs of resource depletion and potential human injustice.
So the next big challenge for Brazil isn't just attracting that $2 trillion in digital investment they're aiming for.
No, perhaps the bigger challenge is ensuring that the national policy, the regulations, and crucially the enforcement on the ground actually benefit all Brazilians. That the wealth generated doesn't just flow to the large enterprises receiving the tax breaks, while the environmental and social burdens fall disproportionately on vulnerable local communities. That's the balancing act.
A truly challenging thought and a critical balancing act indeed. That's a perfect place to leave it for today.